If there ever was a magic pill, check out this review from Peter J on our beef organs and fire starter from Heart and Soil. He says, we all know there is no magic pill in life. However, if there was, this is it. Beef organs with a combination of fire starter are absolutely insane. I have been keto carnivore for a few years now, and nothing has come close to what I have felt with this combo. Let's start with the mental clarity. Right off the bat, I noticed that I could think more clearly. My energy levels are through the roof, so much so that I even noticed during my weekly men's league hockey game at 22:10 hours, I'm absolutely buzzing even after working all day. Let's also not forget the energy and stamina in the bedroom either. Haven't even taken the whole package yet, and both my wife and I noticed a difference already. Mood is much more even keeled and stable, and sleep has been noticeably better as well. Like I said, if there ever was a magic pill, this would be it. This is the real deal. Thanks, Dr. Paul and the Heart and Soil crew. I love this stuff, guys. Organs, they're magical. At Heart and Soil, we do grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised organs, desiccated, freeze-dried to preserve as many nutrients as possible, put them in glass bottles. They're all sourced from New Zealand. This is how you reclaim your birthright to optimal health. Firestarter is amazing. I talk about this fat from the suet of animals in this podcast, stearic acid, odd chain fatty acids. If you can't get these fats, Firestarter is an amazing combination. And when combined with our supplements, will help with absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and other nutrients in the organs. So get organs in your life, either fresh or desiccated. Check us out, heartandsoil.co. That's .co, heartandsoil.co, and reclaim your birthright to optimal health. On this week's podcast, I am doing another solo cast on testosterone. I did a survey on my Instagram, and 66% of you wanted testosterone over cholesterol. So you got it. So I'm going to talk about why your testosterone is lower than optimal and how to get it back. And it's going to wrap in many of the animal-based concepts you have heard in the past. Let me know what you think of this one. Send me a DM on Instagram, etc. Share this podcast with people you think would be benefiting from it. It's not just for men either. Testosterone is important for women. As I say in this podcast, these changes that you can make to your life will benefit both men's and women's hormones, and I believe get you toward optimal hormones, no matter whether you have ovaries or testicles. Both are very similarly related. So enjoy this podcast on how to optimize your testosterone, which is really a discussion of how to optimize your hormones and get them back on track. If you do these things, I strongly believe your hormones will absolutely get back on track without a doubt. If you like this podcast, please leave me a review at Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us reach more people. This message is super important. If you heard the podcast last week with Liver King, you know that both he and I believe that we would be pieces of shit if we did not spread this message that is so important for so many people. And I've seen it. I see it every day. I see it every week. I see it every month. I see it every year. Thousands upon thousands of people that are benefiting. So it feels good to do this work. Please help me spread that by leaving me a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to the Fundamental Health Podcast, and share it with people that you think might benefit. Without further ado, on to this week's podcast. Send me a message on Instagram. Let me know you guys think of this one. Love you all. What is up, truth seekers? Welcome to the Fundamental Health Podcast. This week, I am going to dive into testosterone. This is relevant to both men and women. I did a survey on my Instagram and asked, do you guys want to hear about cholesterol? Something I've talked about a lot, perhaps too much. Or do you want to hear about testosterone, optimization, etc.? The results were resoundingly testosterone. It was 66% testosterone, 34% cholesterol. So in the future, if you guys want a podcast on cholesterol, I can do that. But this week, I want to dive into testosterone. The fact that my audience is mostly male, I'm not sure why it's trended that way. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm drinking blood and eating raw testicle on my Instagram a lot recently. Who knows? But that may be the reason that you guys are all interested in testosterone. But hopefully there are some ladies out there listening to this as well who have men in their life that need to hear this podcast, or who are interested in optimizing their own hormones, because everything I am going to talk about in this podcast is relevant to women's hormones as well. And women have testosterone as well. And women need testosterone for fertility, for libido, for sleep, for mental clarity, for your own muscle mass, for leanness, etc. So everything I'm saying in this podcast is relevant to both men and women. Men especially think about optimizing testosterone because most of us know that it's essential for looking good, body composition, sleep, libido, erections, mental clarity, avoiding dementia, mood. All of these things are critical for testosterone. Bone density, essential. All of these things are at the center of the testosterone equation. So You want to optimize your hormones, whether you're a man or a woman, but I will reiterate one more time, everything I'm going to talk about in this podcast will affect women's hormones. And by that, I mean canonically estrogen, progesterone, etc., in similar ways. I will do a separate podcast if the ladies scream at me enough on women's hormones and break this all down again. But this one is about testosterone. So let's dive in. Why would you want testosterone? I already enumerated that. You want to look good. You want abs. You want muscles. You want a libido. You want to be sexually active. You want erections that work. Or you want, in women, you want a sex drive that works as well. You want mental clarity. You want to avoid dementia. All of these things. You want a proper mood. We know that testosterone can help all of these things. That's why you want to optimize it. What is optimal? We'll talk about that in a moment. But it's important to note that in this podcast, I'm not really going to go into TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. I don't do TRT. I've never done TRT. I'm going to show you my labs in this podcast, and I take no drugs, do no hormones, and I really don't take any supplements. As you guys know, when I don't have fresh organs, I'll take desiccated organ supplements from heart and soil supplements. I don't even really think about these as supplements. If you want to split hairs with me, perhaps they are. They're desiccated organs with nothing added. They're not synthetic. So I'm just trying to get nutrition, and that is the result of my research and my life to this point. And you can see the results of that on my labs. My last testosterone was a little over a year ago, so I'll repeat it soon. Share that in my feed on socials. But you can see the differences, as I will get into, between early carnivore with no carbohydrates, then adding carbohydrates back with fruit and honey in my own testosterone. I'll go into other blood work, sex hormone binding globulin, etc. But as we start this podcast, I want to give you guys the broad overview. Here are the main reasons that I think your testosterone is tanked. There's no particular order to these. They're all important, but I'll just enumerate them and I'll get through all of them in this podcast. Number one, remember, no order to these. Not enough calories. You're calorie restricting. That will tank your hormones. Number two, you're not getting in the sun enough. Not enough vitamin D. Number three, you're not sleeping well. We can see that in your blood work. I'll tell you how to tell if you're not sleeping enough and that's affecting your testosterone and hormones negatively. Number four, your cortisol is too high, which can be a result of not sleeping, or it can be a result of stress or other traumatic experiences. Number four, your nutrition is off. You're deficient in something, whether it's saturated fat, whether it's boron or other nutrients. I will talk about that in this podcast. The takeaway there will be get meat and organs in your life. Number 5 or 6, I lost count, is perhaps you're eating too much fiber, and that can definitely affect your hormones negatively. Number 7, let's just say, polyunsaturated fatty acids. I harp on this all the time, but there's good evidence that polyunsaturated fatty acids like seed oils may negatively affect your hormones. Yes, I said it and I will keep saying it. Last but not least, a ketogenic diet, a diet deficient in carbohydrates, in my opinion, can raise your SHBG, can raise your sex hormone binding globulin, and cause your free bioavailable testosterone to decrease. So I will break down all of this. I will show you the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. So all the hormones and the names make sense here, but that is the overview. If you correct all of those things, I can almost guarantee your testosterone will increase, you will feel better, or if you're a woman, your progesterone, your estrogen will increase, etc. And overarching all of that is that if, as a result of any of those things, or processed foods, processed sugar, you are insulin resistant, that will also completely mess up your hormones without a doubt. So before we dive into a number of these causes and papers that I have to support my assertion that these causes are relevant for low testosterone, I want to talk about the endocrine axis for this hormone. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see this graphic. If you are not, then I will try to explain it to you verbally. So you have in the brain, a region of the brain called the hypothalamus, which produces a substance called GnRH. GnRH signals to the anterior pituitary. There's a posterior and anterior pituitary, but in the anterior pituitary, there are 2 signaling molecules, 2 hormones released that travel through the body and end up in male's testicles or in women's ovaries or throughout the body of both men and women. These are LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Now, these have different effects at different places in the testicles. As you can see in this graphic, which is a little more complex, the gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus goes to the pituitary, and you have GnRH, which is more GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, FSH, and LH. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, makes sense, goes to the Sertoli cells in the testicles and stimulates follicles, which become sperm. Spermatids, spermatogenesis, it makes sperm. So FSH is stimulating the production of sperm, through the Sertoli cells, from the Sertoli cells in the seminiferous tubules in your testicles. It does a little bit different things in women, but I can talk about that in a future podcast. LH, luteinizing hormone, goes to the Leydig cells around the seminiferous tubules, and that is where the testosterone is created. You can see here in this graphic, the testosterone can be converted to estrogen, and that all of these hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and inhibin produced by the Sertoli cells as a result of FSH, feed back negatively at different parts of the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. This is how many hormones work. If they are high, they feed back, and you can see the releasing hormones or the precursor hormones going down so that the body has this natural balance. In more detail, here is a picture of the seminiferous tubules. These are in the testicles. So yes, if you are eating bull testicles or you are taking whole package from Heart and Soil, you are getting all of this in the seminiferous tubules of a bull. But there are many nutrients in here that can be valuable, including the testosterone produced by the Leydig cells out here and all of the other cofactors, et cetera, which is probably why we eat testicles and why we find nutrients in them and benefit for both men and women, and evolutionarily or historically why both men and women have consumed these. But you can see that there is a seminiferous tubule here. The Sertoli cells are here. The spermatids are here. As we remember from earlier, FSH is going to the Sertoli cells, being involved in the formation of spermatogenesis, that is sperm. LH is going to the Leydig cells, and from there, we are getting testosterone produced in the testicles. Just so that everyone is familiar with the process of hormonal interconversion, I want to show steroidogenesis briefly. Though this graphic looks complicated, I think it's important to see the steroid backbone here. So if we look at the formation of steroid hormones, what we are talking about there is a steroid backbone, which is in fact derived from cholesterol. The body makes cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, yet this molecule is demonized, even though it's essential for steroid hormone production. So at the top, or the beginning of the steroid hormone synthesis pathway, we have pregnenolone. Depending which enzymes you use on this steroid backbone molecule of pregnenolone, you can go to progesterone or you can go to 17-hydroxypregnenolone. And you can see that these molecules have different precursor fates. If you go down the path, 17-hydroxypregnenolone to dihydroepiandrosterone, which is DHEA, to androstenedione, then you will eventually end up in testosterone, which can then be converted to dihydrotestosterone from 5-alpha reductase or to estrogen derivatives with aromatase. And you can see that happening here. So oftentimes when people take exogenous testosterone, they will aromatize that and increase their estrogen when they often don't want to, though estrogen is important in both men and women, and completely eliminating estrogen in a man can lead to massively bad effects. Regardless, sometimes people who are taking exogenous testosterone will take aromatase inhibitors because they want to limit this conversion. Whether or not that is a wise thing is hotly debated. Further up on this steroid hormone synthesis pathway, you can see that if you take pregnenolone across to progesterone, you can then end up at deoxycorticosterone and aldosterone, corticosterone, which are in fact mineralocorticoids and involved in the preservation and maintenance of electrolytes, not so much sex steroid hormones like testosterone, estradiol, et cetera. So this is the way many of the hormones are interconverted and connected. There are many different enzymes here. It is complex, but it is important to understand that testosterone and estrogens, estrone, estradiol, estriol, are all connected via simple reactions that you can inhibit or increase those reactions to move these around. But ultimately, many of the androgens, that is androstenedione, androstenediol, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, have androgenic effects, and they can almost all end up being converted to the estrogens if you are getting too much of them, usually from the exogenous conversion pathways. So with all of that said, as a baseline, let's talk about some of the reasons that your testosterone could be low. And I will dig into some of the papers that are associated with this, and hopefully this will be revealing to many of you. Let's start with the most obvious reasons, that being insulin resistance. So there are myriad studies to suggest that insulin resistance is associated with decreased testosterone. Here's a paper from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism from 2005. Increasing insulin resistance is associated with a decrease in Leydig cell testosterone secretion in men. Remember that Leydig cells are around within the seminiferous tubules and produce testosterone in response to LH, luteinizing hormone, coming from the anterior pituitary. It's very clear there is a strong association here between insulin resistance and low testosterone. Another paper from the same journal low testosterone levels are common and associated with insulin resistance in men with diabetes. Okay. Yet another paper, The Dark Side of Testosterone Deficiency, Type 2 Diabetes, and Insulin Resistance. This is from a journal called Andrology, January 2013. But you can see here in the abstract, a considerable body of evidence exists suggesting a link among reduced testosterone plasma levels, type 2 diabetes, and insulin resistance. Hypogonadal men are at a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. There's probably a dual causal relationship there, meaning that hypogonadism probably increases your risk for type 2 diabetes. And I would say that type 2 diabetes and or insulin resistance, AKA metabolic dysfunction, also increases your risk of a low testosterone because those Leydig cells, your pituitary, all of your hormonal axes are not going to function properly. They go here further. They go on to say further, here we evaluate the relationships between testosterone, metabolic syndrome, that is metabolic dysfunction, and insulin resistance, and discuss relationships among androgen deficiency and these factors, especially as it ultimately relates to the development of cardiovascular disease and erectile dysfunction, two things that none of us want. So it's quite clear that there is a strong relationship here. I don't know how much more we really have to say about this other than the fact that there are preventable, reversible causes of insulin resistance. I've talked about this many, many times on previous podcasts. If you are of the opinion that insulin resistance, diabetes is not preventable, that you must take insulin, that you must take metformin, then you should probably get a new doctor because your doctor is not telling you the whole story in any way, shape, or form. Insulin resistance is highly preventable, totally reversible with really two easy steps. Number one, completely eliminate processed sugars. If you've listened to my podcast before, I've done many podcasts on the differences between processed sugar, that is sucrose, which is a disaccharide of glucose and fructose, or fructose in processed form, high fructose corn syrup, etc., and fruit. There's a big difference between those two. I do not think that you have to eliminate fruit or honey, though if you are frankly diabetic and insulin resistant, limiting your carbohydrates from them, at least temporarily, is probably not a bad idea, though you don't need to completely eliminate them. I do not believe that fruit and honey cause diabetes. I do not believe that fruit and honey worsen diabetes. There are good studies to show that honey can improve insulin sensitivity. It may raise hemoglobin A1C, which is a 90-day average of your blood sugar, but that is a reflection of the fact that when you are diabetic, your body is not handling glucose very well, and that honey is going to have glucose and fructose, and it is going to raise your blood sugar. But indices of insulin sensitivity do improve with true raw honey, not a processed honey, not a high fructose corn syrup. So I do not fear fruit and honey in diabetes. Don't overdo it, obviously, but they did not cause it. Processed sugar is the problem. You know where this is. Sodas, cookies, cakes, cereals, etc. That in conjunction and often co-occurring with seed oils is the main problem with diabetes and obesity. These go hand in hand, metabolic dysfunction. All of this is connected. If you eliminate processed seed oils, processed sugars, I strongly believe, and I will bet every single one of you a ribeye, that you will see improvements in your metabolic dysfunction if you eliminate those completely. End of story. Next step, eat an animal-based diet. Why are you eating vegetables? This is advanced for many people, but I do not believe these are helpful for humans. I don't believe that leaves, stems, roots, and seeds of plants, which are the most highly defended parts of plants, are essential or even useful for humans. As you will see, there is some evidence that a higher fiber diet with low fat is actually going to decrease your testosterone. I'll show you that study in a moment. So why are you getting lots and lots of fiber from vegetables? But Paul, we've been told they have all of these beneficial compounds in them. Well, I've talked about it in the past. I'm not going to go into that in this podcast, but suffice it to say that I don't think those plant compounds are doing anything unique in your body that you cannot achieve with meat, organs, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. And you will get much less defense chemicals when you cut out the highly defended parts of plants. Those are vegetables, canonically, leaves, stems, roots, and seeds. So what are the steps to reversing your insulin resistance and improving your testosterone if it is indeed low because you are insulin resistant and obese? Well, you have to be very committed to this, but you must eliminate processed sugar. You must eliminate seed oils. And if you want to go all the way, eat an animal-based diet of organs, either fresh or desiccated like we make at Heart and Soil Supplements. Meat, about 1 gram to 1.25 grams of protein from meat per pound of body weight, or if you're very obese, per pound of goal body weight. Fruit, honey, and raw dairy. I've done previous podcasts on raw dairy. For a long time, raw dairy bothered my skin. It doesn't seem to bother me at all. Maybe it was just that the sourcing I was getting was different. Maybe my gut changed, or maybe the dairy I was getting wasn't truly raw because it was from cheese. So now I'm doing raw goat's milk from my friendly goat farmer Lolo here in Costa Rica. That, in my opinion, is the clear way to reverse insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, full stop. If you don't know if you are insulin resistant or metabolically unwell, you probably can just look in a mirror. If you don't have a six-pack, get your fasting insulin checked. Even if you do have a six-pack, get your fasting insulin checked. I've talked about this on many previous podcasts. Your fasting insulin should be less than 5 micro-IU per ml. You can also wear a continuous glucose monitor from a company like NutriSense. I had Kara from NutriSense on a few months ago. We talked about my previous continuous glucose monitor readings. You can tell from a continuous glucose monitor or from a fasting insulin how metabolically healthy you are. If your testosterone is not optimal, then you can always improve it by doing these steps. Reversing your insulin resistance will be the first and most important step in this process. Do that, my friends, do that. In case all of that was not crystal clear, here is a paper from October 2009 in Nature Reviews Endocrinology, Testosterone Deficiency, Insulin Resistance, and the Metabolic Syndrome. Changing lifestyles and excess of food supply in developed countries have resulted in increasing prevalence of overweight and obesity. I would say yes, but not just excess of food supply, excess of processed sugar and seed oils. The authors go on, as a consequence, a disorder of complex pathophysiology involving visceral adipose tissue as an endocrine organ. Visceral adipose tissue is the fat around your organs within your peritoneum. It is not subcutaneous fat. It is an endocrine organ. Done a previous podcast with Sean O'Mara talking all about visceral adipose tissue. The authors continue, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, and hypertension has emerged, the so-called metabolic syndrome. This disorder can lead to the manifestation of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. In men, testosterone deficiency may contribute to the development of the metabolic syndrome. In turn, states of hyperinsulinemia that are associated with metabolic syndrome and obesity lead to a reduction in testicular testosterone production, okay? The authors continue, testosterone has reciprocal effects on the generation of muscle and visceral adipose tissue by influencing the commitment of pluripotent stem cells. These are stem cells that can go either way, and inhibiting, or many different directions these stem cells can go. And by inhibiting the development of preadipocytes, insulin sensitivity of muscle cells is increased by augmenting mitochondrial capacity and fostering expression of oxidative phosphorylation genes. I agree with that. Testosterone has protective effects on pancreatic beta cells, which is possibly exerted by androgen receptor-mediated mechanisms and the influence of inflammatory cytokines, et cetera. So you get this very clearly now that testosterone is affected strongly by insulin resistance. And you better know, number one, how insulin sensitive you are, and you better change that if you hope to have ideal testosterone levels. So think about that the next time you are reaching for a slice of pizza or a Coke or even another piece of processed food. This is going to negatively affect your testosterone without a doubt. Now, you make the choice in your own life whether it's worth it at that moment, but I choose to avoid that all the time in my own life. The next reason for low or suboptimal levels of testosterone and hormones in men and women is a very interesting topic that I'd like to dive into next, which is really perhaps this two-pronged attack of high fiber, low fat diets, which do appear to negatively affect testosterone in a significant way. So this is a paper titled The Effects of Dietary Fat and Fiber on Plasma and Urine Androgens and Estrogens in Men, a controlled feeding study. This is not an epidemiology study. This is a controlled feeding study done with 43 healthy men aged 19 to 56. They were either randomized to a low-fat, high-fiber or high-fat, low-fiber diet for 10 weeks. After a 2-week washout period, they were crossed over to the other diet. So this is a crossover study. They say the energy content of the diets was varied to maintain constant body weight, but averaged 3,170 calories per day on both diets. The low-fat diet provided 18.8% of energy from fat with this is important, a ratio of polyunsaturated to saturated fat of 1.3. So more polyunsaturated than saturated fat on the low-fat, high-fiber diet. That's important. Whereas the high-fat diet provided 41% of energy from fat with a polyunsaturated to saturated ratio of 0.6. 0.6. So two things happened in each of these arms. Perhaps it would have been better if the researchers changed one thing at a time. But in the low-fat group, they had lower fat, less than half of the amount of fat. And the fat they did get was the majority, and the fat they did get was and of the fat they got, the majority was composed of polyunsaturated fat, and they got less saturated fat. The high-fat diet had 41% of energy from fat, and they had less polyunsaturated fat and more saturated fat. In the high fiber group, that was low fat, they ate about a little more than twice the amount of fiber that the higher fat, low fiber group ate per day. And that amount was pretty significant. It was around, I would say, it looks like from the paper, between 50 to 60 grams of fiber in the high fiber group and 20 to 30 grams of fiber in the low fiber group. So pretty significant differences in the amount of fiber. They measured plasma concentrations of total and sex hormone binding globulin bound testosterone, and they found that the concentrations were significantly higher, 13 and 15% higher, respectively, on the high fat, low fiber diet, which you can see here. And the difference from the low fat, high fiber diet was significant for the SHBG bound fraction of testosterone. That is the sex hormone binding globulin bound fraction for the testosterone. I should have mentioned this perhaps a little earlier in the podcast, that when we are talking about free or bioavailable testosterone, those are similar, but not the exact same measurement. Testosterone can be bound to albumin. It can be bound to sex hormone binding globulin. And if your SHBG goes up, then your free testosterone is going to go down. So they were measuring both the bound portion and the free portion of testosterone in this study with these two interventions. So from this study, which was a crossover study, 10 weeks, 43 healthy men of ages 19 to 56, they found that a low fiber, higher fat, higher saturated fat, lower polyunsaturated fat resulted in better hormonal profiles, better testosterone profiles, and actually apparently more favorable estrogenic profiles in men. So one of the reasons that your testosterone could be low is you're not getting enough saturated fat, you're getting too much polyunsaturated fat, or you're eating too much fiber. We know that lots of insoluble fiber, lots of plant fiber in general can bind to hormones in the gut and interrupt enterohepatic circulation. It's debated whether this is a good thing or a bad thing that hormones are recycled in your gut. Some people say it's a good thing. Some people say it's a bad thing. But if the fiber is binding to hormones in your gut and pulling them out, it is going to decrease their absorption. It is going to decrease their recirculation and decrease your overall levels. There are studies in women that I can talk about on the podcast that will accompany this one, perhaps in the future, on women's hormones, that show that women who eat more fiber have a higher rate of anovulation and a higher rate of infertility, possibly because the excess plant fiber in the gut is interrupting normal enterohepatic circulation of estrogens, which is necessary for proper cycling in many women. So excess fiber can be problematic for humans, something that is controversial in my views, but I have talked about many times in the past. So let's talk about another meta-analysis, which shows very similar findings. So I've had Joe Whitaker, the author of this meta-analysis, on the podcast in the past. The title is Low-Fat Diets and Testosterone in Men, a systematic review and meta-analysis of intervention studies. You can see here that there were significant decreases in sex hormones on low-fat versus high-fat diets. They went on to say that low-fat diets appear to decrease testosterone levels in men, but further randomized controlled trials are needed to confirm this effect. I know that Joe was thinking about being involved in some of those, and hopefully we will see the results of them soon. But this is not a small meta-analysis. They said that they included 6 eligible studies, a total of 206 participants. So it's reasonable. It's hard to find these studies. Many of them, like the one we just saw, are not a ton of men. There were 43 in the previous study. This is a 6-study meta-analysis of 206 participants. But it's a pretty clear signal here. You can see the p-values and confidence intervals if you want to read the abstract of this paper by Joe Whitaker. But I think that this is a fascinating question. It flies in the face of modern, quote unquote, colloquial wisdom, which is to limit saturated fat for cardiovascular disease reasons, probably because saturated fat will raise LDL in some individuals. But if you've listened to my other podcast, you know that I do not fear LDL that is higher in individuals who are metabolically healthy because they are including nutrient-rich animal fats and organs and meat in their diets. So I don't worry about saturated fat in humans, even humans with ApoE4, and I've talked about that in previous podcasts as well. And these studies, this meta-analysis, this controlled feeding study, might also suggest that saturated fat from animal fats is essential or very helpful for increasing testosterone with all of its attendant benefits in men and helping hormones in women as well. We cannot ignore this. And all of this makes great sense evolutionarily What are the foods of fertility? What are the foods of libido? Why is meat carnal? Why are things called carnitine, carnosine? Because these are the foods that increase libido. We know this intuitively. Humans have known this forever. You get a big kill, you eat the organs, you share it with your wife, and then you have romantic experiences. You have intimacy, you have sex because you are horny, because you have nutrients in your body. This is what humans need. Humans don't feel necessarily horny after eating salads. And remember, I've talked about this a lot recently. Kellogg's was created by Harvey Kellogg to prevent masturbation. Kellogg's cereal, cornflakes are the anti-masturbatory food. They are going to tank your hormones. This is the connection with Seventh-day Adventist movement and a lot of these grain-based foods. If you eat a bunch of grains and you don't eat animal fats, you will control your hormones. You won't have a libido, which could be good if the libido is very problematic in your life. But in general, most of us want a healthy libido. So how do we get that? We get that with animal foods, animal organs, and animal fat. And as we go a little bit deeper down the animal fat rabbit hole, there are two particular animal fats that I want to highlight. They are stearic acid and odd chain fatty acids. Both of these are essentially found only in animal fats. You can find stearic acid in cocoa butter, but I would not eat chocolate because chocolate is going to have lectins and oxalates and then processed sugars in it. But cocoa butter, which is quite sticky, will have stearic acid. I think tallow, high stearic acid tallow from the back fat is the best source of stearic acid. That's what we put into our fire starter from Heart & Soil for people that can't get that high stearic acid, suet and tallow from the back fat or the kidney fat of animals. So that's important, stearic acid and odd chain fatty acids, which is something that I've really not heard anyone speaking about. So I just want to show a couple of quick papers about odd chain fatty acids. Most fatty acids, most saturated fatty acids in the human body are even chain length, but odd chain fatty acids like C15 and C17 are quite interesting. So this one is from Scientific Reports. The title of the study is Odd Chain Fatty Acids, New Insights of the Relationship Between Gut Microbiota, Dietary Intake, Biosynthesis, and Glucose Intolerance. Recent findings have shown an inverse association between circulating C15 and C17 fatty acids with disease risk. Therefore, their origin needs to be determined and understanding of their role in these pathologies should be clarified. And they find that 2 human dietary intervention studies were used to translate the results. Finally, a study comparing baseline C15 and C17 with the prognosis of glucose intolerance. We found that circulating C15 and C17 levels were not influenced by the gut microbiota. The dose response study showed C15 had a linear response. However, C17 was not directly correlated. And what they found was that when people had more of these fats in their body, they were correlated with better results. And there was a dose response relationship, especially with C15. Where does C15 occur? Well, it occurs in animal fats, not in plant fats. Imagine that. Look at this paper right here. The efficacy of dietary odd chain saturated fatty acid pentadecanoic acid parallels broad associated human health benefits. Could it be essential? And I think it certainly probably is essential. And they find that pairing our findings of this authors in the study with evidence that C15 is not readily made endogenously in the human body, lower C15 dietary intake and blood concentrations are associated with higher mortality and a poorer physiological state. And number 3, C15 demonstrated activities and efficacy that parallel associated human health benefits. We propose C15 as a potential essential fatty acid. Isn't that interesting? Yet another essential fatty acid. And where is it? It is in beef fat and whole milk. Okay, so these are connected, I believe, with all sorts of things. They say here they have been associated with inflammation or attenuating inflammation, anemia, dyslipidemia, fibrosis, mitochondrial function. All of this is again connected with metabolic health, which we know correlates with testosterone function. My hypothesis would be that if you correlated or you found an association between C15 levels in the human body, consumption of beef fat, tallow, milk, raw milk preferably, and testosterone levels, that would be a strong positive association. I can't wait for people to discover C15, probably C17 as well, because it is an essential fatty acid. And guess what, vegans? You ain't getting any. So I'm sorry. You need some fire starter from Heart & Soil, or you just need to eat some meat and organs. We love you guys. Come back to the fold. You've been away too long. So before we move on from this dietary topic, there are a few more pieces that I would like to unearth and show you guys. Let's go a little further into the polyunsaturated fatty acid rabbit hole. What we know is that increased intakes of polyunsaturated fatty acids do cause DNA damage in human lymphocytes. title of this study is The Effect of Increased Intakes of Polyunsaturated Fatty Acids and Vitamin E on DNA Damage in Human Lymphocytes. You guys can look at that abstract if you would like. They compared 2 levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids and found that feeding these, this is cell culture exposure of these, did cause increased DNA damage in those lymphocytes. Also, let's look at the concentrations of the lipids in this study in rat testes. There's a lot of interesting studies on rat balls. Influence of commercial dietary oils on lipid composition and testosterone production in interstitial cells isolated from rat testes. So they're looking at 4 different oils here. Unfortunately, they didn't use tallow. They used soybean, olive, coconut, and grapeseed. Now, let's just back up and understand that soybean and grapeseed are going to have much higher levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids, much higher levels of the 18-carbon omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid, linoleic acid. Olive is going to have less, and coconut oil is going to have the least. So what they found was significant differences were found. What they discovered was that significant differences did occur in the lipid composition among the groups, most of them reflecting the specific fatty acid composition of the diet tested. And I've discussed this in humans in the past many times. Your fat cells, your cell membranes will be a reflection of the ratios of the fatty acids that you are eating. If you are eating more linoleic acid, your fatty acids, your cell membranes will be enriched in linoleic acid. This is one of the reasons I have concerns about putting seed oils on your skin or eating them via your mouth, and that contributing to sun damage in the skin, maybe not making the sun the only or main cause of skin damage, but the composition of your cell membranes, a very important variable as well. They found in this study that testosterone concentration was higher in the olive oil and the coconut oil group compared with the soybean oil or grapeseed oil group. Now, many of you may think that grapeseed oil is healthy, but grapeseed oil is in fact a seed oil and is quite high in linoleic acid. So I see nothing healthy about grapeseed oil. They go on to say, in agreement with this observation, the activity of both key enzymes involved in testosterone biosynthesis, which is 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase and 17-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, was higher in the olive oil and coconut oil groups, with significant differences between them, with the olive oil group being higher than the coconut oil group. So that's interesting. A significant negative correlation was found between cellular testosterone production and cellular cholesterol ester content. Additionally, testosterone concentration was directly correlated with cholesterol levels. No surprise there. We conclude that dietary oils qualitatively and quantitatively modified the lipid composition of the interstitial cells, producing either a direct or indirect regulatory effect on testicular steroidogenic function. So these are rat balls, these are rat testicles, but in rat testicles, when you give the rats more polyunsaturated seed oils, you see problematic decreases in the levels of these sex hormones. Okay, this is consistent with what we've seen in humans. Remember the first study I showed you guys, the study in humans with high fat, that was higher in saturated fat, lower in polyunsaturated fat, and lower in fiber, with the group that had higher fiber and less fat, but that fat was higher in polyunsaturated fat and lower in saturated fat. And they also had lower androgen markers across the board. So I think there's a pretty key indicator here that there's a problem for humans if you are eating super high fiber, potentially interrupting the enterohepatic recycling of hormones. And if you are eating too low fat and not getting animal fats, stearic acid, odd chain fatty acids, C15, could all be part of this equation. What does this harken back to? Yet again, an animal-based diet. What are the foods of fertility? What are the foods of libido? What are the foods of romance? Meat and organs. And we'll get to why fruit might be in a moment here. There's another element that we can think of when we are considering the nutritional requirements for a healthy testosterone, and these are minerals like zinc and boron. We know very clearly that zinc is essential for proper testosterone function. Many people supplement with zinc, hoping that it will increase their testosterone. There is a problem, however, with zinc supplementation without adequate copper. You can essentially create a copper deficiency. Both zinc and copper are controlled by metallothionein proteins. The levels of these minerals are controlled by metallothionein proteins in the gut. And if you are over consuming zinc without adequate copper to balance it, then you can cause a copper deficiency in the human body. And this has been shown. And I have seen clinically and heard of clinical cases where people created a testosterone deficiency connected with a zinc overindulgence. And I worry about this a little bit in the current viral pandemic times, because so many people are taking lots and lots of zinc, which is a great thing because they're probably not eating enough meat and organs, which are the true bioavailable sources of zinc. And they're not getting any copper, or they're not getting enough copper because they're probably not eating the organs that are high in copper, things like kidney or liver. Sometimes people will ask, can I get too much copper from liver? No, you're not going to get too much copper from liver because of these metallothionein proteins in the gut, which are going to balance the zinc and the copper. If you are getting zinc in your diet, and you have metallothionein proteins and you're getting some copper, and perhaps you eat a lot of liver one day and you get extra copper, your body's just going to excrete that extra copper along with some zinc bound to these metallothionein proteins in the gut. So there's an elegant system here. How much liver is ideal? I think a half an ounce to an ounce a day, maybe 6 ounces a week is fine for most humans. And that's the dosing that I imagined when we were formulating Heart and Soil supplements. So if you look at many of our supplements, they have half an ounce or less than half an ounce of liver in the capsules per day. We want to have people take 6 capsules a day if they can't get fresh organs. And in those 6 capsules, there is sometimes less than half an ounce of liver per day. So it's a small but effective dose of liver. Obviously, fresh is best. Get fresh organs if you can. If you can't, that's why we do what we do at Heart and Soil. Many of you know the website for that is heartandsoil.co. But getting organs in your life is essential for vitamin A. I'll talk about vitamin A and testosterone in one moment, but also for other minerals, zinc, manganese, selenium, et cetera. So many other benefits of liver, choline, carnitine, et cetera. The list is hugely long. I don't have to tell you guys about why liver is so beneficial for humans, but getting liver will give you a source of copper to balance the zinc. Nevertheless, zinc is essential for proper testosterone function. Where would you get zinc? I don't know, meat, organs, et cetera. Where do vegans get zinc? I have no idea. That is a mystery that no one will solve, because you don't get much zinc on a vegan diet. I remember when I was a raw vegan, I ate pumpkin seeds, imagining that I was getting zinc from them because there's not many sources of zinc on a plant-based diet. But guess what? Those pumpkin seeds are full of phytic acid and oxalates, which is going to make that zinc very poorly bioavailable. Sigh, sad face. This happens over and over. As an interesting aside, when I was raw vegan, I also had a very low magnesium despite eating 2 massive heads of kale per day and tons of almonds, both of which are foods that are supposed to be high in magnesium, but I was massively low in magnesium. For some unexplained reason, people have begun to fear vitamin A a little bit in liver, but I think that at those doses of liver, half an ounce a day, vitamin A is great. And we know that vitamin A is essential for human health. And in fact, studies like this one show us that vitamin A supplementation can actually improve hormonal panels, hormonal levels in children with delayed puberty. So the title of this study from Clinical Endocrinology in 2004 is Vitamin A and Iron Supplementation is as efficient as hormonal therapy in constitutionally delayed children. Tell me again that liver, which would have both vitamin A and iron in it, is bad for humans. So these are 102 boys aged 13.6 to 15.5 years who were referred because of short stature and delayed puberty. Now, this is actually a really interesting study for me because this describes me. This describes Paul Saladino when he was 13 to 15 years old. I had delayed puberty as a young man, as a prepubescent man. And we did hormonal testing. I don't think I've ever actually talked about this on a podcast, but no one could find a reason. Eventually, the hormones turned on, things caught up. I had no idea about nutrition then. I probably was eating way too much cereal, way too much peanut butter at the time. But if my parents had known about this, I didn't need hormonal therapy as a child. But look, subnormal vitamin A intake is one of the etiological factors in delayed pubertal maturation. Supplementation of both vitamin A and iron to normal constitutionally delayed children with subnormal vitamin A intake is as efficacious as hormonal therapy in the induction of growth in puberty. This study really hits home for me because this is probably the reason, or at least one of them, that my puberty was delayed as a child. I remember being a freshman in high school. This is an embarrassing story, but I'll tell you guys. And during sex ed, the teacher says, I know all of you guys have hair under your arms. A freshman in high school, I'm sitting there sweating bullets and thinking, I don't have hair under my arms as a freshman in high school. I needed more vitamin A and iron at the time. Thankfully, my hormones did turn on. Any of you guys watching this on YouTube can tell that I have hair on my face and eventually I hit puberty. So thankfully, all good in that department for me. But look, vitamin A and iron deficiency can cause constitutionally delayed puberty in humans. Tell me again that vitamin A is a toxin. Tell me again that you shouldn't be feeding your kids a little bit of liver. Get that hogwash out of here. That is total bullshit. The last piece of this equation nutritionally that I want to talk about is boron, something that I spoke about a lot early on in my carnivore days when I wasn't eating any fruit. I was just doing meat and organs. And I thought, where the heck are we supposed to get boron from on a strict carnivore diet? It was really hard. I think I found some study somewhere that suggested there was boron in bones. And so I was eating bone meal. I tried supplementing with boron a little bit. That did seem to decrease my SHBG, which went up on a ketogenic diet. I'm going to show you guys my labs in a moment. My SHBG was essentially double on a ketogenic carnivore diet what it is now that I have added back in fruit and honey on an animal-based diet of organs, meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. But in that process, it was important for me to understand what was causing the issue for me. And one of the things I looked into was boron. So I supplemented boron and I did feel increased libido, probably because that SHBG, which was inappropriately elevated from long-term ketogenic diet, strict carnivore, was perhaps decreased by boron. But as we know, if you supplement with boron, it tends to just drop SHBG and then it rebounds back up. Boron is, though, apparently quite essential for proper hormonal function, especially testosterone. And interestingly, you can get plenty of boron in your animal-based diet just by eating some fruit. So I did a little research and found what appears to be a pretty accurate chart. There are two studies cited here, Hunt et al., 1991, Anderson et al., showing the fruits here: apples, apple juice, applesauce, bananas, cherries, grape juice, orange, peaches, pears. Unfortunately, there's no tropical fruit like papayas, pineapples, or mangoes, but I eat a lot of bananas here in Costa Rica, and per kilogram of bananas, I'm getting 3.72 milligrams of boron. I don't think I eat 2 pounds of bananas per day, but they're a good source of boron. I'm probably eating 5 or 6 bananas a day, which is something I've talked about now. I'm eating some mangoes. I will eat some papaya. I will eat some pineapple, and I do eat some honey. And in fact, honey is also on this list. If you go down to the bottom here, you can see that honey has 6.07 milligrams of boron per kilogram. Again, not eating anywhere near a kilogram of honey per day, but I am eating 3 or 4 tablespoons of honey per day. So I think that on an animal-based diet, I'm getting a really nicely adequate amount of boron. The ideal is perhaps 3 to 4 milligrams per day. Avocado is also great in boron. Now, if you look at that chart in detail, they'll show you that boron is also high in things like vegetables or nuts. And I would say that the boron, which is a mineral, is probably not very bioavailable in those vegetables and nuts at all. That would be my suspicion. And I don't think it's worth getting nuts in order to get your boron, because they're going to come with all the other problems that nuts have with them: phytic acid, digestive enzyme inhibitors, etc. The only type of nuts that are worth eating are bull testicles. That is an appropriate joke that I stole from my friend Carnivore Aurelius, that I have to drop on this podcast about testosterone and about bull nuts. And if you're not eating bull testicles, why not? Like I said, you can get some in whole package from Heart and Soil. It's one of my favorite ones that we make. Okay, we've covered a lot. One of the last things I want to talk about is sun exposure. And this is not a full podcast about sun exposure, skin cancer risk, skin damage, ultraviolet light. I've done previous podcasts on that. I can go back down the rabbit hole. Sunscreen, yes, is mostly bullshit. It's full of garbage: octocrylene, avobenzone, homogentisate, all kinds of garbage things in sunscreen that are excreted in your poop and your pee and cause cancer. Sunscreen is bullshit. If you're going to use a sunscreen, use something that's animal-based with animal fats and zinc. We're developing something. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be a bit, because sunscreens are hard to build, but we are building a good sunscreen for you guys in the future. But sun exposure is valuable, and there is some evidence, though the research is not completely clear on this, there's some good evidence that sun exposure is associated with positive increases in the gonadal axis. So skin exposure to UVB light induces a skin-brain gonad axis and sexual behavior. This is from Cell Reports. I'm not sure you get any more reputable than a Cell journal. The graphical abstract here says that perhaps this is involved with P53 gene activity. And they are looking at animal models, but they are saying that there is good evidence that solar exposure in humans enhances romantic passion and positively correlates with male testosterone levels. So I would say, if you are not getting in the sun, do that if you want more testosterone, or if you want improved hormones as a man or a woman. There's probably a good reason that no one takes a honeymoon, and I can't say that. Very few people take a honeymoon to Arctic, Iceland, or very northern places. People go on honeymoons to warm places with lots of sun. And who knows, maybe you get in the sun and you feel a little more libidinous, a little more horny. And that's a great thing on your honeymoon, or any time that you want to have sex with your romantic partner, because this is the place to do it. This is the place to do it. I mean, I'm sitting at the 9th latitude in Costa Rica, and I can tell you it's great here. There's a lot of sun, and I think people are quite healthy here from at least a sun perspective. And I do put myself in the sun quite a bit. If you've seen any of my stories or any of my social media, you know that I'm quite tan. People will sometimes say, aren't you worried about skin cancer? To which I say, no, not at all, because I don't have much linoleic acid in my cell membranes at all. But what I do benefit from is a healthy libido because of that sun exposure for a variety of reasons. I cannot find any articles to substantiate the claim that sun on the testicles or tanning naked is particularly beneficial, but it feels good. I do it from time to time. One of the benefits of owning my own house in Costa Rica is that I can tan naked on my porch. Who knows if it's beneficial or not, but I'm covering that base just in case. One more thing that I will mention here is this study from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and it shows the variation in levels of serum inhibin A, which is a feedback loop, remember, from the Sertoli cells, testosterone, estradiol, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and sex hormone binding globulin in monthly samples from healthy men during a 17-month period. Possible effects of the season. I will just tell you in brief that the seasonal variation does appear to be real, at least in this study. And this is a Norwegian population who may see more variation in the days between the winter and the summer. But I think that most of us will at least subjectively agree that being in warm climates, being tan, getting in the sun does improve libido, as long as you don't overdo it and get tanned and then get really tired because you're burned. So yeah. Now, before I wrap up the podcast, I want to talk about my personal experience, and I want to talk about ketogenic diets and testosterone. So a lot of people do experience, either from the women's perspective, changes in cycle length when they go keto or do strict carnivore, which I think is probably not a good thing. And men see decline in testosterone without carbohydrates. It is something that I saw, and I will show you my labs in a moment. My testosterone went down 20 to 30% on a strict ketogenic carnivore diet, and then rebounded significantly in terms of total and the sex hormone binding globulin. The SHBG also decreased from 113, 120 to high 50s, and I suspect it's even lower than that now when I added back fruit and carbohydrates in my own diet. So one reason for your low testosterone may be inadequate calories, as I talked about earlier, or inadequate carbohydrates. I do not think long-term ketogenic diets are great for humans from an electrolyte perspective. We know that insulin actions are essential at the level of the kidney for proper maintenance of electrolytes, and that hormones can suffer negatively from long-term ketogenic diets as well. So this is my blood work from, I would say, July of 2019, at which point I was strict carnivore. You can see that the free testosterone is low at 4.64 nanograms per deciliter. The testosterone was 562, previously 696, and that the SHBG, the sex hormone binding globulin, was 113, previously 123. So a lot of kind of declining hormones on this ketogenic diet. I still had libido. I didn't have any erectile issues at this level of testosterone, but I was quite interested when my hormones did improve or visually change significantly with the addition of carbohydrates. This is a more recent testosterone panel from a little over a year ago. You can see the SHBG is now 59. The total is 742, and the free is 641. That is picograms per ml. So the units are different. And the total testosterone bioavailable is 123. I want to get this tested again more recently, and I will share that with you guys. But you can see that there are pretty significant changes that happen in many people's hormones that mirror mine. With a ketogenic diet, I do see SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, go up very high and then improve when you add back carbohydrates. So yet another reason that I'm a fan of carbohydrates. And look, now I'm getting lots of boron in my bananas and my papaya and my pineapple, covering that base as well while I'm in the sun, and not eating seed oils and not eating processed sugars. I'm just trying to optimize my own testosterone in all the ways that I can for all of the reasons that we spoke about earlier in the podcast. So hopefully this one has been helpful to you guys and also to you women. So remember, women, if you've made it through all of this talk about testicles, that your hormones will be affected by all of the same things. Are you getting nutrients? Are you getting organs? Are you getting saturated fat? Are you getting odd chain fatty acids? Are you getting stearic acid from animal fat? Are you getting too much fiber? Are you getting not enough of zinc? Are you getting et cetera, et cetera? These all things will influence women hormones in the same ways. And I think that the way you achieve optimal hormonal health for men or women is by doing these things and doing them pretty darn religiously. So Hopefully you guys enjoyed this podcast. I think it will massively affect your testosterone. And what I will say to you all is that so many men get diagnosed with low testosterone and are given testosterone supplementation, I think prematurely, before all of these things are checked, before all of these things are essentially corrected. How many doctors are saying, go get in the sun, go exercise, go lose some weight, go get rid of your seed oils, go get rid of the processed sugars, get more organs, get more meat in your diet, get more saturated fat. Are you getting odd chain fatty acids? Are you getting stearic acid in your diet? No, they're all too happy to prescribe testosterone supplementation. And this has long-term consequences for males. I can talk about that in a previous podcast or a subsequent podcast if you guys would like. But in short, it affects the testicles negatively. It will impair the testicles' ability to make testosterone long-term. And many men find that once they go on higher doses of testosterone replacement therapy long-term, they cannot get off because the testicles have essentially gone into a prolonged hibernation. So if your testicles work, let your testicles work. I have clients who are in their 70s and have testosterone, total testosterones in the 800 to 900s. This is possible for men. They have sex hormone binding globulins that are low in the 50s or 40s. And so I don't think there's any reason that you can't have these levels of testosterone well into your adult male life. So in summary, I am not completely convinced that testosterone will tank in every male as they age, nor am I convinced that declining testosterone is irreversible or uncorrectable, nor am I convinced that we cannot regain adequate levels of testosterone if our testosterone levels have dropped as we have aged as males. Furthermore, I remain unconvinced that females in their pre-menopausal years cannot optimize their hormones through diet and lifestyle through many of the same interventions that I outlined today. So just to review for everybody as I'm wrapping up this podcast, I would say that low testosterone is often related to lack of sleep, something that I didn't really go into a whole lot in this podcast. But if you are not getting enough sleep, your LH and FSH will go down. That is how you know if it is a pituitary cause or a gonadal cause. If your LH and FSH are high and your testosterone is low, then your testicles are not responding properly. But if your LH and FSH are low, then your brain is not telling your testicles to produce testosterone. And that is related to stress and sleep. So those are problems. Nutrition is a problem. We talked about boron, talked about vitamin A, talked about iron, talked about odd chain fatty acids and stearic acid. We talked about animal fat in general, saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, fiber, talked about vitamin D, sunlight exposure. All of these are real causes of declining hormones and imbalanced hormones in men and women. And the biggest daddy of them all is insulin resistance, which we went into some detail about how to correct. So there is your tome, there is your primer, there is your semi-Bible, the abridged version on testosterone and male hormones. And also with a nod to females, because as I said, these same methods will allow females to optimize many of theirs. So if you guys have questions about this, send me a DM on Instagram. I try to get to as many of those as I can, or you can go to carnivoremd.com and sign up for the newsletter. And if you need organs in your life, check us out at heartandsoil.co or check out many of the sponsors of this podcast for ordering your organs fresh. All of that will improve your health radically. Okay, my people, end of this one. I'm out. I'm going to go get some sun on my whole body, maybe get an evening surf and go eat some boron containing fruit and organs and enjoy the sunset here in Costa Rica. I love you all. Stay radical.